Hello again. Whenever we think about how humans behave, we find both similarities and striking differences in behavior across groups. Human behavior is hard to separate from the tools we use. So when we talk about cultural differences, we include art, cooking, clothing, and music, as well as morals, beliefs, and language. We refer to these differences as the culture of a group or society. Animals may not possess art or language like we do, but in this video, we'll explore whether they show analogous cultural differences. Animals do frequently differ in behavior among social groups, and the process by which these differences accumulate is similar to that in humans. Social learning is common in animals, so the behavior of younger animals in particular is shaped by that of their older group mates. When a new pattern of behavior arises in a group, it quickly spreads to the other members, especially if it conveys some sort of benefit. If groups don't interact much with each other, their behavior will gradually drift apart as different patterns arise and are passed down in each group. At this point, you may have realized the similarity between culture and the way evolution works, and indeed, both obey many of the same rules. You can think of culture as a type of non-genetic inheritance, a process by which information is transferred across generations by social forces. In fact, you could go even further and say that culture is that part of an animal's phenotype that is inherited through social learning. How do we detect whether animals have culture? One way is to look for geographical differences in their behavioral repertoires of animals. This is known as the ethnographic method. One example would be dialects in the calls of humpback whales, orcas, and several bird species. Another would be differences in tool use across groups of orangutans or chimpanzees. The ethnographic method is a useful starting point, but differences among groups are not enough by themselves to show culture. There could be ecological or genetic explanations for those supposedly cultural differences, and these may not be immediately obvious. So how do we go about defining culture in an objective way? What are the minimum requirements for something to be classified as culture? Opinions vary somewhat, but one approach is to check for the following 5 elements. Social learning. Culture being something that animals learn from each other. Vertical transmission, because culture must be passed on from young to younger animals and offspring. 3, persistent behavioral change, because to be culture, it needs to stick around. General rules, because cultural patterns should apply broadly. For example, a preference for the phenotype of an individual, rather than just a preference for that individual in particular. And lastly, conformist. This is not strictly necessary, but is the gold standard. Animals adopt culture based on the most common pattern in the group. If you think these seem like strict requirements, it might surprise you to learn that researchers have evidence that even fruit flies can meet them. In a mate choice experiment, virgin females were allowed to observe males marked with 2 different colors, attempting to mate with other females. They arranged these demonstrations such that only males of one color successfully mated, to create the impression that those males were of higher quality. The virgin females were then asked to choose between the new mates marked with the same colors, and they preferred whichever color male they had seen mating. Given that animals such as fruit flies have the potential for cultural transmission, it seems likely that culture plays a role in most animal species that regularly interact with conspecifics. But what are the implications of cultural processes for how animals behave? Let's look at examples from 2 recent studies. Our first example concerns the culture of feeding behavior in humpback whales. Humpbacks use a technique called bubble feeding to catch fish, in which the whales blow bubbles to herd the fish into a tight group so they can be swallowed en masse. Around 1980, one whale developed a variant of this technique that included slapping the surface of the water with their tail before blowing the bubbles. Researchers called this lobtail feeding, and noticed that it was spreading through the population, perhaps because it improved on normal bubble feeding. Using a database on whale behavior collected over 27 years, they found 653 whales that had been sighted at least 20 times and analyzed occurrences of lobtail feeding. Network analysis showed conclusively that social transmission was the most important factor in naive whales acquiring the behavior. Our second example investigated social conformity in vervet monkeys. Researchers gave groups of monkeys corn separated into 2 trays. In one, the corn was dyed pink, in the other, it was dyed blue. The researchers treated one tray with aloe leaves to make the corn taste bitter. Half the groups got bitter blue corn, and the other half bitter pink corn. Unsurprisingly, the monkeys quickly learned to only eat the corn that wasn't bitter. The researchers then waited 4 months and offered the monkeys pink and blue corn again, this time with neither colour tasting bitter. Interestingly, both adults with prior experience and infant monkeys born since the previous stage of the experiment strongly showed the group preference for colour. Further support for conformity came from 10 male monkeys that moved between groups with opposite colour preferences during the study. Of the 10, 7 immediately abandoned their original preference and adopted the preference of their new group. So if animals can transmit information socially across generations, how are humans different? Why does our culture include things like computers, symphonies, satellites, skyscrapers, modern medicine, while other animals are limited to simple tools and traditions? The answer is that our culture is cumulative. We can maintain existing cultural patterns with high fidelity until improvements come along. Over time, this leads to behavioural patterns that a single individual could never have developed alone. Human ability to accumulate culture this way is rooted in our excellent social learning abilities and our causal reasoning, coupled with language, writing, and even online videos, which avoid the need for direct transmission between individuals. Have a think about these videos, and about all the other tools and cultural constructs around you right now. Imagine if every human had to start again from scratch. Our lives would be unrecognizable. Thanks for watching.